This is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good? I'm good. Kind of. For all my people that follow me on my Chicken Kingdom stories, let me tell you something. It was a bad week in Chicken Kingdom for Marlene. I had as for the people that don't know, I moved out here to a very country. Let's put it this way: the town I moved into is a population of 5,000. Very rural area in North Florida, which of course what comes with it is a lot of wild things. Bottom line, I had lost chickens to owls. I had some hawks around, but they were smaller. Most of my chickens were okay, unless they were like the chicks. Well, the other day, I'm thinking it's either I might be a golden eagle, a lot bigger bird of prey. Killed 3 of my chickens so far. 3. And I even got one. I had one who was kind of like wonky, one of my silkies, and I had him in a pen. You know what it is? It was one of those dog crates. You know how you and every once in a while I would put him out there so he could get some sun, and that thing got him through the bars. Okay, little was left of that chicken. So yeah, for any of you following me on my chicken journey, it was a bad week for Marlene. So now I call this bird because I caught it once. The first time I found what was left of the chickens. The other time I caught it, it's like once they find out about, they come back. And I realized this thing is huge. So I call it the mega nemesis. Not going to do anything to it because it's following its nature, but it's like, it's you and me, okay? So yeah, that's my mega nemesis now. So if anybody knows, that's, yeah. The regular hawks and the owls, they just went down into like the owl, I know all I have to do is just worry about after dark, but 3 chickens in a week. Oh no, Marlene's not happy. Anyway, let's get on to other things. My sponsor, PlanToStaySafe.com. They carry a lot of camping sporting equipment. They've got a lot of neat spy gear, like cameras in your eyeglasses. They have stuff in you have a wireless phone charger. They've got a hidden camera in there. They got stuff like that, real neat stuff that you could use. They also have a lot of the travel alarms. Let's say you're going traveling and you want to put something on your doorknob, just in case somebody opens the door. They've got a lot of stuff like that that's portable and it's really useful. For a lot of people, yeah, you might have a home security system at home, but there's things that sometimes you want to carry with you when you're traveling, and they've got things of that nature. They got a lot of stuff. So go ahead and check them out. PlanToStaySafe.com. All right, let's get on to the good part. The good part is the guest that I have on here today, which is the first time that he's here on Stories of the Supernatural. And I know a lot of you are going to be really interested in this subject. And the death of a loved one can have such a profound effect on one's perception of life on earth as we know it. Death can make you question the reason for your existence. Why are you here? What is your purpose? And why on earth do we live only to die? Now, the gentleman that I'm going to bring on, his name is Michael Habernig, and he is the founder of Path 11. Okay. And what happened with Michael is he experienced a large number of deaths in a very short period of time of friends and family members and pets Oh, as a matter of fact, in a year and a half. So he went into a period of depression that triggered him to explore the concept of life after death, which this happens to a lot of people. And in 2007, he decided to use his expertise in filmmaking to search out experts that could provide answers for his first documentary, exploring life after death. And he's reached out to local hypnotherapists, people who could astral project, quantum physics experts, and healers. And after a year of gathering experts and catching up on his solo film project, it was at this point he came across another partner, which is April Hanna. But what I have with us today is Michael. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Michael?
Oh, doing pretty good. How about you?
Good, good, good.
Yeah.
Let me ask you. I know that in the bio it mentions that you had amount a year and a half is really a very short time. Deaths that affected you. Prior to this, had you ever had any interest like this in life, afterlife subject, or anything like that?
Yeah, and looking back, there's been times throughout even my like early childhood to like teenage years, I've always had an interest in this. I remember like I used to watch the X-Files,
Okay.
and they were more alien based, and that and then at one point I got a copy of the book by Daniel Brinkley.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of it. I read the
This was
first.
the.
I know he did like a number of books, but it was the first two that he did. That I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember something in the light. And yeah, so I was very interested in that, and I came from a very religious background, so it's like we talked about it, but it was never in depth, and we didn't go past that religious border. So anything that didn't include anything that was related to the Bible, we never talked about because that was the bad
Dangerous
stuff.
territory.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was shortly. Yeah, this is probably about now 2007. That's almost 10 years after living on my own. I got married shortly after I moved out of my parents' house. So yeah, I was able to kind of freely research this topic now. And YouTube was in its early stages, so there was like 15-minute clips here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Greg Braden, who's not really an after death kind of guy, afterlife type of guy, but he does talk very spiritual stuff. I
Yeah.
found Thomas Campbell, who we later interviewed for the documentaries. Um, William Buhlman's another one that he's very big into astral projection. So
Okay.
talking to them as well as people that April had known, because she's been studying this stuff years longer than I have,
Okay.
and we found experts that that taught her, um, that we were able to talk to, interview, and it just opened up this whole new world, um,
Let me
about
ask you
that.
something. What happened to you were what happened was that because you said, "Oh, I grew up in a religious household." Okay, which obviously, even if they didn't want to talk about it, I'm sure they certain things supposed to happen to you after you die. As in, did you feel at that point is that really what happens? Is that what you were questioning, or is there something else beyond what I was taught as I was growing up?
I, yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of like if you live a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
when you die, it's going to be a good or bad. It's punishment or reward.
Right.
Um, and I shouldn't say it was my immediate household. Like my parents are actually probably the most liberal, spiritual liberal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I later found out that my dad used to research, I guess, lucid dreaming back when he was in college.
Really? Isn't
Uh, and
it funny sometimes when you find out about your parents, like what they were up to before they
yeah,
became parents?
and my mom actually, probably about 5 years before I even started the films or even researching any of this, she was kind of looking into past life regression stuff, and she had saw a few mediums that came, into town. So yeah, I mean, it's like I couldn't have picked a better pathway if I was planning this life. I probably couldn't have picked a better
Okay.
way to, because it's and looking back, it's like from childhood to going to college for film school, and then later working in TV, live TV, then advertising. um, it was like this path just fell in front of me, and it's just like it I couldn't have planned it any better. And then having the
Okay.
parents who, that actually support me doing this, because I
Right.
know their parents were not were
Right.
actually
Right.
the strict ones. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. But and like you said, a lot of Judeo-Christian beliefs are if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad,
Yeah.
you're gonna burn in the hot place. It's
Yeah.
like that's it. And of course, contrary to even though it's more liberal, there's no the how can I say reincarnation, like that you get another chance at it. No, this is like your one chance to do good, or that's it. You're in trouble for eternity.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and it always a lot of that though always sometimes fails to explain sometimes what happens when people see apparitions or what they call death crisis. Like somebody that's just passed away that a family member will see them. It kind of leaves like a this like you said, sometimes people don't want to talk about that because it's like, no, 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 let's not talk about that. Um,
Yeah.
so in the how long did it take you to do that documentary that you started?
We started that in the spring of 2008. I
Hmm.
had done research on my own in 2007. That's when a lot of family members were passing away.
Okay.
Some were expected; they were elderly, and then
Right.
there were a handful of unexpected, some tragic
Okay.
deaths. Yeah, and then it was just that spring. I was like, whether it's at the time, I'm thinking, maybe this we do a couple series on YouTube, just like interviews here and there,
Right.
and then I thought, why not just go all in and make a movie out of it? And then, of course, working with April, we got all this footage, and we outlined that we could actually. I think we started with four films, and
Okay.
there was one film we called it film number three, which
Okay.
was more about healing and Reiki. It kind of didn't fit in with the overall
With the
scope,
afterlife.
so it ended up being the trilogy.
Let me ask you, when you started doing the documentary as far as the interviewing,
Yeah,
did you find out things that were like, wow, I didn't know this, or because you said I did research before.
yeah. That
What what happened with that?
well, it's kind of funny. We going into, like, especially the first film, and it's probably the film that we liked the least because it was a learning experience. So
Hmm.
our questions that we were asking were kind of all over the place. And now, if I were to do another film, it would be to the point, um, strict outline. I know exactly what I'm asking. I kind of know what kind of answer I'm going to get based on how much research I've done. But that first film, we didn't. We did enough research to know who to talk to. We didn't know exactly what to ask them. But, when we got into the conversation, it's usually after that first hour, we start getting surprises,
Okay.
from some of our responses. Like Tom Campbell, um, I was in the middle of reading his books. He's got three, books. I can't remember how many pages, but they're good size and they're
Hmm.
heavy reading. It's very scientific. I
Okay.
It's like very, not math, but math concepts and
Right.
science concepts, which that's not really me. I'm more of
Hmm.
the art and visual. So, that he I think he's right brain, I'm left brain. I think that's the term. But he provided some he really, I guess for me, he kind of dumbed it down a little bit for the
Okay.
interview. And we've got something like, I don't know, it's like 12 hours of footage of just his interview. It was over
Okay.
we filmed it over 2 days, and some of the stuff that he gave us stuff that was not in the books, and actually some of
Okay.
it he later told us not to publish because
Okay.
we were just having candid conversations. But at one point, we were in this little cabin filming him, and we were in there for so long the one day, I think it was the first day, he began to read our minds.
Oh.
Um, and I don't know if you're
That,
familiar
that
with
oh, okay, you cut
like.
out a little bit. I'm sorry. What was it that you said that you had that you were in there so many
Yeah,
days?
we were in there like 2.5 days, I wanna say it was,
Okay.
maybe 2 full days, and each day, we're doing like 6, 8 hours a day with him, and
Wow.
so after a while, he began to read our minds. So
Okay.
it's like we have a question that we're going to ask him next, and he goes from one answer, and he just starts. He goes, "Oh, I just want to answer that question that you're going to ask," and then
Wow.
he
Okay, you're
it's,
like, alrighty then. This is what
so,
happens after. Let
yeah,
me ask you in conclusion though, does he believe in the afterlife or the survival of the
yes,
spirit, the soul after human death of the body?
yeah, he does. But it's a little more with him, especially. He's a little more scientific, so
Right. And I know what you're saying as far as
he, we do have this consciousness that does we shed the body and we move on. He talks about um, he compares it to a video game. That's probably the best way to put it.
okay.
So it's more like this avatar that we're playing around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just dies and you get another avatar and you come back and you do it again and
Right.
you gain points as you go. But of course, with him, it's more of lowering entropy and creating order within the universe. Each time we
Okay.
learn something new, this
Mm-hmm.
order, we're creating balance, I guess. See what's
Right. In other words, each lifetime has its challenges because that's the way it's supposed to be. But
yeah, right, exactly.
right, we
Yeah,
just don't exist for the sake of existing.
right. We're here to learn, really.
Exactly.
And, yeah,
Which kind of also um because I understand kind of what he's thinking, because sometimes people think, well, what happens to us is happenstance. Like there's no order, or the I don't want to use the word predestination, but it's almost like maybe certain things that happen to you are supposed to happen to you because this is what you came here to handle that situation,
right.
you know.
And what I found interesting, and this is probably one of the surprises that you mentioned, or that you asked about, was that in the research, what we found is it's almost like there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything is
Right.
planned out for everything has a reason. But when we
Right.
talk to him, it's kind of I got the impression that it's like an 80-20, 70-30,
Okay.
or 70% of it is mapped out. But then there are random things that accidentally happen.
Okay.
Um, and it's
Right.
almost like something unexpected will happen, and then the universe recalculates and moves forward from there.
Right.
And
And that makes sense. Because you always think also of free will.
yeah, exactly. Um,
Right.
and the
Because
universe,
if not, it
yeah,
would be like you think that there's a how can I tell? It would seem like we have free will, but we don't. If you think, well, everything is going to happen that certain way, it's like, okay, so what's the use of free will if that's my choice going to be anyway, no matter what?
right,
So, and I'm sure that
yeah,
sometimes I take that into consideration. Those people that have that gut feeling, I'm not going to get on the plane because I have this feeling it's going to go down. They decide not to, and
yeah.
then they do that 30%. I'm not going to get on the plane thing,
And
stuff like that.
what I like about Tom, too, is that I, he was the one that was the most mysterious going into this documentary. He's
Hmm.
at the time he wasn't very well known. Um, I think he did coast to coast radio maybe twice at this point. Um, but his online presence wasn't as big as it probably is now. But he talks about when he got started because he started at the Monroe Institute as one of the engineers that helped set up the labs that they created,
Okay.
which later went on to become HemiSync and um,
Hmm.
the facility that it is now. So he he went out to the Monroe Institute. Um, well, his scientific lab was his science lab was sent out was invited by Bob Monroe to come out, and they talked. And Tom at the time was kind of skeptical, and he's like, I don't know what, is this guy just trying to make a dollar, selling a book, you know, but Bob, I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Monroe, but he made millions in the cable and radio TV industry, so he didn't really need it. And the same thing I noticed that with Tom,
Okay.
is that was like, is Tom, one of these guys that, they're just looking for a way to make a dollar, and so they come up with this elaborate story about out of body experiences, and it, but once you meet Tom, it's kind of like you realize that we were invited to his house, and we saw that he made his money. He lived
Mm.
comfortably. He wasn't wealthy, but he's definitely
Right, right.
you
Just
know
done what he was doing as
he,
his engineering, or
yeah
had nothing to do with.
he worked at NASA as a
Yeah.
physicist, so he made he was fine. I think he retired right after he retired. We met up with him, and most of the time he
Okay.
just gives his books away for free,
Right, right. Yeah, it's not a. I know
and
exactly
it's
where you're
not
coming
like
from.
he's not making money off of this. So it's, I mean, he
Well,
makes a little bit so that he can do some
right,
costs,
right. And
but
I know what,
yeah,
and it's almost like more the passion for the project or whatever it is he's discussing versus, like you said, oh, I'm going to put this together because it's going to sell great. It's like that's the real motivator, and I might need to
yeah,
spice it up a little bit so that it's, yeah. And unfortunately, in that area of the afterlife and things like that, yeah, you do get some people getting in on that are like, their motives are questionable and they're more into sensationalism than actually pursuing, you know, facts.
right,
Even though that's a
right,
very fuzzy field sometimes to get facts on, but yeah, it. Let me ask you, because
sure.
I used to do hypnotherapy. I used to have a hypnotherapy practice for many years. What happened when you started interviewing hypnotherapists? What were you talking to them about? The past life regression?
Some of them, yes. We um In the films, we don't really go into uh, past life regression that much.
Okay.
Um, there's one woman, Brenda Jenks. She was one of April's teachers. I don't remember. I can't remember the date. April probably the best one to talk about that. But she is a hypnotherapist.
Mm-hmm.
We did outside of the film. I did do a past life regression with her, which
Okay.
was interesting. I've never done that before. Um, yeah, we didn't. Other than that, other than her, I can't remember. Um, Nobody was actually a clinical hypnotherapists or
Okay.
official,
Mm-hmm.
other than her that I can remember.
Okay.
Lindsay, um, who she's from New Jersey. She had a near-death experience,
Okay.
which was kind of like a. It wasn't really a past life regression, but she kind of saw things that were parallel to a past life regression through her near-death experience. It's kind of
Right.
like the same thing. Like
That's
you're kind of
interesting.
like in front of a council, and they're like, "Well,
Okay.
here's you gotta keep working, you gotta go back, kind of thing." And
Yeah, kind of one of those review boards.
right,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. It's a
Yeah, and the
subtle
reason why
like
I asked you is because a lot of people have asked me because of the. I used to do alternative hypnosis. I just, I did the regular stuff like lose weight, and stop smoking, all that other stuff. But a lot of people would
yeah,
ask me a past life regression, is it real? And I said, well, there's no proof, but that people that have undergone it, it affects them, whether they do visit a past life or it's all man head and made in their imagination. The results are that it does affect them, especially with deep seated stuff, phobias, weird stuff that sometimes typical therapy doesn't work for them. So
right,
we get a lot of, I
yeah,
have had people ask me that. It's like, there's no way that I could tell you, and I said, and the majority of people are nobodies. In other words, there's no way to ever say, we could look this person up historically and verify the information given. Right. And even then
right.
you're treading a thin line because this, the subconscious basically holds everything. You could have read that information and it's stored in your subconscious mind. And you don't, in other words, you really don't know you're making it up, but you're not pulling it from the nowhere. It's been somewhere you ran across that information. So yeah, that's why I asked you about that. I was curious to see what you had come
We
across.
we did a interview with another project that a few years ago. It's part of Shortcuts on the Path. It's a little series that we've done for Path 11 TV. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the people that we talked to is a his name is James. He's a hypnotherapist up in the Albany, New York area,
Okay.
and he flat out told us, he goes, I don't know if there's a past life thing, but you can tap into it and people will tell you a story
Yes.
that helps them. He goes, he goes, I just want to be on record. I don't know for sure if that's a
Hmm.
thing. And
Right.
he's done, I don't know how many
Yeah, you do.
thousands of.
And I would say, you have people sometimes that come in there with expectations, like, I know I lived because I'm very interested in that time period. They have this, and then
Right.
when you put them back, they come up with something totally that they're like, what? In other words, that you can't even say, well, you know what? They're capturing something that maybe they've read a lot about because they like either that country or that time period, and they're just like they're doing a romance novel kind of version of the regression. No, they come up with stuff that is totally alien to them. And I've had people that can even have smells while they're doing the past life regression. You can
That's
say, how does
interesting.
that work? But yeah, they can, they've been the example I'm going to use is that they were a Greek fishermen. They were by the sea, and they could smell in the regression, they could smell the sea water. So it's that vivid is my point. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing. But of course, there's, when you start trying to quantify it as far as proof, and the best you're going to get, and I know that there's a lot of, how they've done some where where children have had past life recalls, and they go back
Yeah.
and they verify, yeah, that person that, did exist. That one's a little bit more convincing. The point being that usually when you're a child, you're very limited how much information you actually read,
Exactly.
where you could say, hey, this kid basically came across this information and all of a sudden they became that pilot or whatever. That's one of the ones I've heard. But it's a
Yeah.
difficult thing. It's a
Yeah.
difficult area to prove, I guess.
Yeah. It seems like um, it's not a sure thing, even though you can witness so many past life experience
Oh
sessions
yeah.
and you come out thinking that's got to be real, but then you look it up and you see some of like the facts that they
Mhm.
laid out don't line up exactly, but there's
Exactly.
similarities. And yeah,
Oh.
and
No,
the
well,
kid thing is really interesting.
the kid, because, and I'm going to give you a perfect example sometimes. And by the way, I'm talking from the point of a hypnotherapist, which you're there to help the client. You're not there to say, hey, you made that up. One time I had a person come in, and she is reliving where she was accused of witchcraft, okay, in the United States. And she describes being burnt at the stake. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Sure enough, in the United States, anybody accused of being a witch got hung. He never got burned. And I was like, okay,
Oh, it's interesting.
this is something you read, which, yeah, in Europe, that's what they would do. But in the United States, they did not burn witches. They would hang them. They do a lot of other horrible things to, anybody accused of being a witch, in other words, but not burning at the stake. And I was like, see, but again, you're there as a hypnotherapist. You're there to help the person, not like say, hey, no, no, no. Either you're in the wrong country or you're making this up from something that, unfortunately, there's a lot of exposure out there to that. And I don't know if you ever heard it, and also theories that we can even reincarnate into other planets.
I've heard that. Yes. Yeah.
That's another one that's like kind of a little bit of in other words, it's not just the human experience. Your soul or your essence, whatever you want to call it, could decide I want to incarnate in a Venus or whatever, or another, galaxy. And I was like, oh, I'm having a hard time with the human,
It's
let alone
that reminds me of a book by another filmmaker. Of course, I can't. His memories or his name is slipping my memory, but I believe it's called Flipside.
okay.
And he's a filmmaker and he goes out and he films through Michael Newton. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I'm very familiar with Michael Newton.
I guess he followed a few of Michael Newton's uh, hypnotherapists around,
Mm-hmm.
and so he's recorded so many, and he put it into a book. There's a movie and a book. So and you watch these hypnotherapy sessions,
Mm-hmm.
but there's one in like I want to say it's like the middle of the book where it's the person that is reincarnated from an alien ship,
Okay.
and it's like this whole alien race that's come to Earth to help Earth progress in a certain
Hmm.
way. And everybody else goes to like the spirit world where they meet dead relatives. This one person just comes from like this mothership that's hovering
Okay.
around Earth, and then they go back to I don't know whatever planet. But the author, I really should look up his name. He asked the hypnotherapist at the end of it, what's the deal with that one? That was completely
Hmm.
different. And the hypnotherapist is like, yeah, every once in a while we get one of those that come from this
Yes.
alien
Yeah.
planet,
Yes.
alien world.
Yeah. And one of the first ones I came across, well, that wrote about it. It's a gentleman. He's already passed away, with Dr. William Baldwin.
Okay.
Okay. Because I used to do work also in spirit attachments. And, a lot of these doctors, by the way, psychiatrists, doctors, whatever they were, they ran across this phenomena by coincidence. It wasn't that they were looking for that. They were hypnotizing their clients for age regression, trying to find out, why do you have this phobia, or why, maybe this, something that people didn't remember, and that if they came across it, it would help them. And all
Okay.
of them kind of go into that. All of a sudden, they're going into past life. And at the beginning, a lot of them are thinking that it's just the impatient, and they're like, okay, let's go with it. Then later on, they come to find out but anyway, he was one of the ones that I read about. That his book came out in the 90s, where he discusses where he finds spirit attachments, and they're not human spirits. What they are aliens, as in that they're attached because they have a way of attaching, like, to etheric body, and basically they're observing, you know, the human being. And basically, it's a process. You detach them,
Oh
you make
yeah.
them go away, whatever. But in other words, he was one of the first ones that I read about. And then you do read about other doctors or mental health people that have used hypnosis, that have run across that, where it is an alien, or non-human entity. How's that? From another planet, because there's other non-human stuff. That's a whole. But
Yeah.
it's very interesting where they. It's almost like a science experiment. They're attached to the human to observe.
That,
And you want to
yeah.
say they don't know about boundaries. How's that? Like, you're not supposed to do that kind of thing. But again, how do you quantify that? It's a very interesting field. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and as a matter of fact, I don't know if you've also heard of people, the recovered memories of abductees, etc. That's a whole different thing also with the hypnosis. So let me ask you, Michael, when you started doing the film and you interviewed, all these different sources, did it confirm for you the belief that there is life after death of the death of the human body?
Yeah. It definitely um, confirmed that yeah, there is something does happen after your body dies. You do move on. Whether and of course, everybody I think is going to be slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
Some people I think go off and they go to the spirit world and they maybe reincarnate on another planet. Maybe they just never come back to Earth. Maybe they never reincarnate again. And I think there's some people that just they die and they're born instantly again. It's like there's
Right.
no
Just
turnaround. It's like
right. They boot around again and they come
right.
through. Yeah. Uh-huh.
But then I from also what I've heard is that we're living multiple lives at the same time
Right.
happening simultaneously. So it's
That's a
like
real mind bender.
there's and working on the films, there's so much evidence that for me personally was answered, but at the same time, it's in a way that I can't put it out there that would prove it to anybody else. It's
That's
like
the
this.
problem with this field.
It's
That is the problem with this field. You can have
yeah,
theories, you can have hypotheses, but as far as to replicate it, where you could put out a model so people could do it, that's it's really, really hard. Because you're always I want to say, let me ask you, did you interview anybody as far as the near death experience?
yes, um, yeah. Lindsay, I mentioned her before. Her
Yeah.
her near death experience. She got struck by lightning at a
Oh,
like a beach area.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a really interesting story. It's in the first film. Basically, yeah, she went through the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
She was at this council. They said you got to go back. Well, no, actually, I she kind of wanted to stay, but there was something, and she later found out that it was her kids that were still
Right. I
living.
always hear that you're kind of like,
She
in
had to
some
come back for
cases,
her
given a
family.
choice. Yeah, you're
Right.
given a choice.
Um, yeah, it,
And you know
yeah,
what? It always, because I'm sure that that's, I think, that 70-30 split that Thomas was, yeah, it's almost like, because let's face it, I imagine if there's a moment that it's your time, it's like your time. You're not gonna
yeah,
get that question, do you want to go back? It's like whatever, however badly you might be needed, I don't think you get that choice. Like, do you want to go back? And
yeah,
and the reason why I asked you about that is I say, nowadays they can resuscitate people so much so than before, you know, as far
right,
as, besides, like, before, people, they would put you in an ambulance and cart you off, and you hope that by the time you got to the emergency room, now, you have paramedics that work on you. People now know more about CPR, basic CPR, but at least if they can keep your heart going, and I'm thinking, I wonder if he came across more instances of that near death experience, because I've heard people sometimes 20, 25 minutes, they can be brought back.
yeah. And that reminds me of the CPR. Daniel Brinkley. I think it was his
Hmm.
first near-death experience. He was struck by lightning on the phone,
Didn't he
and
get struck twice? Or am I making that
that's
up?
good. He may have. I
Okay.
know the first time he was on the phone and he got struck by lightning.
Okay.
But it was like they were doing CPR on him in the ambulance, and
Mhm.
his consciousness was kinda, like, following the ambulance to the hospital. He was kinda, like, attached somewhat, but
Yeah.
loosely attached. And now I can't remember exactly, but something where he doesn't make it and he dies, and then he wakes up, I think it's 20, 30 minutes later outside the morgue.
Oh, that should. I
It
remember Daniel Brinkley,
Yeah,
but I read that he brought this book out like in the 80s, I want to say, or
late
early
'80s,
90s.
yeah,
It was like
yeah,
a way back that I read it, and I remember that. And it was like, yeah. So in other words, they had already taken him to the morgue, is what you're saying.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
and then I think his second near-death experience was, something happened during surgery.
Right, and he had
I
the
Yeah, I
yes,
should read
that
those
that
books again. It was so long ago.
no, it's, what it is when you have so much material. Like I said, I remember reading it. I probably read it more than once, but right now I just remember the outlines. And I remember that he got
Yeah,
struck,
yeah,
that and not struck twice, but that he had two near death experiences. And more to the point, that one, I'm going to tell you, the thing about the near death experience, when people describe conversations and people in other rooms, hey, that to
yeah,
me is more proven, because there's no way that if you are either in an operating room or in an emergency room being worked on, that you know who's there having what conversation and what they're dressed and looking like. And you just, God, now there's countless people saying, hey, exactly like what you described. They hover up and they're looking down at them being worked on, and then they kind of float
yeah,
off, and they they hear conversations. And that's the part where that to me has a lot of merit as far as being proven, because I don't know if, did you ever see that one where they some doctors trying to disprove it, that they kind of like opened up somebody's skull, when they anesthetized just this area, and they started pushing on different parts of the brain that kind of duplicated like the near death experience. And we're trying to prove the opposite. Like, no, everything that people describe is just your brain being maybe pressured, or, as you're dying.
yeah. I did. I think I That does sound familiar. And it's like they hit one area,
Right.
and like dead Aunt Sylvia showed up, and she's like,
Yeah, like it was like a
and
real weird, like
yeah,
in that tunnel, that sensation of going through the tunnel. Like they
yeah,
they were replicating it as depending on what parts of the brain they pressed. And I was like, okay, I
yeah,
understand, I get it. But that still doesn't answer how people know about things that they have no either see or hear. They say even if you might look unconscious, you still have sometimes your hearing. And so, yeah, that's why I was saying that that's a very interesting thing about the near death.
Yeah, I know there is a group. I don't know if they're doctors or
Mm-hmm.
uh, investigators, but what they've done with these medical situations, like in emergency rooms and trauma uh, areas of the hospital, I've heard that they've put images up high that you can only see if you're hovering
Oh, really?
from the top of the ceiling, I guess you would say. So you could
Mm-hmm.
see like a picture of, I don't know what the pictures are, but like a giraffe or something that you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't expect in the hospital on top of, like, I guess a shelf or whatever would be up
Right.
there.
Okay.
And they're like, so when people come back and they say, "Oh, the doctor had the nurse do this," and they would only know that from being in the room, what was on top of that cabinet over there, or what else did you see when you were up there? And I can't remember if they,
I had not heard of that, but that is so
yeah,
interesting. That is excellent. That is great.
yeah. I don't. I have to look again. Which hospitals do that? And
Right.
yeah,
Something that it's like you said, a picture of a giraffe. Who's going to expect that
right.
in some type of hospital setting?
And
That's very interesting.
I think there was. The more I think about it, there was a couple cases that actually they nailed it. It's like they said everything in the room. They described it and they pointed out the pictures. I
Right.
wish I could remember.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Well, because basically what we're looking for is the survival of your consciousness, which is what everybody wants. Um, Once your human body dies, what happens to your consciousness? Uh, let's face it, none of us want to think that that's it.
right.
It's over. We're
Right.
so well. And let me. What else did you come across when you were doing the documentary that you were not aware of or that changed your mind about preconceived ideas?
The other uh, the other thing that kind of threw me off was that these some of us that do have that are able to remember past lives. There's some of us that they come to find out that we've had like thousands of past lives already, and a lot of us are kind of, I don't know who exactly. I'm not saying for myself, but I know there's so many of us that have had past lives that this is like their last life, like on Earth.
Okay.
Um, this isn't really in the film, but it's something that came up in conversation um, around the film when we were producing the film. Um, One of the reasons why I believe we left that out was because you can't prove it.
Right.
And most of the stuff, that's the thing. It's you can't prove it, but it is. We wanted to document everybody else's stories,
Right. No,
like
I know what you're saying.
yeah, it's
You're showing it as a story, not where,
right.
hey, if you're looking for me to produce some type of evidence per se. Let me ask you,
And
when you say we, how have you experienced press lives?
I did somewhat. I mentioned Brenda before. She gave us a past
Mm-hmm.
life. When I had a past life regression with her, it it was weird, just in a way that because the way my brain works, I have a
Okay.
hard time shutting it off.
Oh, you're
So
an
to go in,
analytical? Is that what?
yeah, I'm a thinker.
Yes,
So
that's kind of
yeah,
analytical.
constantly analytical. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. And wha- we did I think it was like a 2-hour past life regression, and the whole first hour is just trying to get my mind to relax enough where I was open to
Yes.
suggestion.
Yeah.
Maybe that's suggestion. I don't know.
No, that's just adjustability. I know exactly
Okay.
what. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, my eyes are closed. I'm doing this whole thing. I'm very relaxed, and then her her thing was, now look down at your shoes. What kind of shoes are you wearing?
Uh-huh.
With your mind's eye, kind of thing.
And you're trying to
And
look, and you're like, my eyes are closed, so how can I
that's
see
like,
anything?
yeah, that's like
See?
I just see black.
Right. I know. Because I had clients just like you. When you
And
tell them see, they're like, I can't see anything because my eyes are closed. So yeah, you guys are like a whole. But anyway,
Yeah,
keep going.
but
I love to hear these stories.
I got this whole, and then this whole story opened up where
Okay.
the blackness turned into, and I don't know if I was imagining this or if I was actually
Okay.
recalling an actual historical thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I woke up and I was like in this prison. I want to say it was like the 1930s, and I was a journalist that wrote a story that slandered a judge
Oh,
that kind of, yeah, it was like I wrote a news story that slandered this judge and law enforcement, like kind of exposing them as corrupt cops and
mm-hmm.
a corrupt judicial system. So they framed me for something, and I remember going in front of the judge, and the judge, because I called him out, he put me in prison. But at the same time, I saw from the judge's point of view, I think I was actually both lives in this past
Okay.
life. So I was the journalist going to prison and the judge that did the
Okay.
sentencing. So then I lived out the rest of the judge's life, and he was this old, very miserable guy that knew he was doing the wrong thing by sending this
Right. Putting
journalist to
somebody in
prison.
jail for.
So the rest of my life, I spent alone. It's like I had kids and a family that really didn't want anything to do with me because I knew that I was a corrupt judge. And it was like this
Okay.
whole interconnected web, um, of this corruption,
So she
and then
what? She took you to your point of death as the judge.
yeah, and
All
it
right.
was like my last days. I was in New England watching, it was like a rainy day watching planes take off at some Cape Cod airport, and it was like later that day I died, and I think one of my kids was with me. It was just really depressing. Like they were all kind of happy I was going because it
Right.
was
It's
like
like,
I was
oh,
like a burden on them basically.
finally he's gone. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but there's things in that life that actually parallel this life that I'm in now.
Really.
Because there at the time there was like this whole fear of uncovering truth
Mm-hmm.
and speaking my mind, even though like I know part of my family would have a problem with this.
Okay.
And there was so many things with the judge's life. It's like I go to Cape Cod every year, and I remember certain things that, of course, I started going to Cape Cod after I had this past life regression. I was like, oh my god, yeah, I know that airport. I used to stand there and watch planes take off in the rain. This is kind of the area where I died.
Isn't
And
that
then
interesting?
I did get a name of the reporter that was put in prison, and I looked it up. Of course, I can't. I should have written all this down, but I looked it up.
Oh,
I know it was. I should have recorded it too, but
you know
I
what?
looked.
My clients, I used to do. I used to record them, and then I would send them the MP3 file because I say because a lot of them would be like, "Huh," and then later on they'd call and they, "Hey, I get it."
But
So anyway, let me ask you something.
yeah,
Once, in other words, you never followed the life of the reporter after you went to jail. Everything just the rest of
well,
your regression was the judge.
yeah, because the reporter died in jail. That was the impression I got from the past life
Oh, okay,
regression.
okay, okay, okay.
The and when I did, it was like that night I got home. I went on the internet and I looked up the name that I was given of the reporter.
Okay.
Um, and it turns out I didn't get the name of any newspaper that this reporter was linked to, but there was a school. I want to say it's in Missouri or Kansas, where there's a whole department of journalism, and it's the same name. But I couldn't
Oh,
get a first name that linked up. So there's like it's
right.
close, but it's not linking perfectly.
Okay,
And I couldn't
okay,
find that name linked to being with this judge,
okay.
this corrupt judge guy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like part of it's there, but it's not 100%. So it's real to me, but I can't tell you that it's
Let me tell you something. It's
100%.
so funny because we're so used to exact information and modern technology that we don't realize that back in those years, misspellings were very common, or different versions of a spelling
That's
of
true.
of a name, even last names, even first names. Where sometimes it's like when you finally find it, it's like that's what the real, because I do a lot of research myself. So, and again, you know, you know how we're used to now everything is known about everybody. Back then, most people lived their lives obscurely just because that's the way it was. Unless you did
Yeah.
something good or bad that the newspapers were interested in you. No, nobody
Yeah.
was taking pictures of you, or the closest you got was like they would do the socials, Mr. and Mrs. So and so are spending the summer at the whatever at their cottage on the beach. And even then, mostly they would never even say the woman's first name. It was Mr. and Mrs. John Smith. You never knew what her name. So there's a
Exactly.
lot of
Yeah.
as far as research to prove it one way or the other, but that's very interesting that you found that name connected
Yeah.
to that journalism
It,
school. That's interesting.
I should have, in hindsight, I should have recorded everything. Maybe I'll
Mhm.
get it done again.
But you
But
said something that it did. In other words, because, and I don't know how she did it, but sometimes, especially when somebody's new, you want to ease them into a past life regression. You don't want to see something that's too horrific, but mostly you ask, what's the most appropriate thing for this person to see? And you said that there was something when you saw this lifetime that resonated with you present time.
yeah, the way the whole fear about these films coming out and
Ah,
how
okay,
the
okay.
how my family would view it. I know most of my family, that they're actually interested in it and supportive.
It was like the last time
There's
I did this, I got punished.
Yeah, it's basically, speaking truth and being punished for it.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, that was that's basically the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't realize that things like that did happen.
The
You know.
and this weird, not completely in sync memory is kind of reminds me of the Mandela effect. That's a lot
Okay.
of people. I don't know if
Yes,
you
of
talk
course.
about,
Yes. Hmm.
and it's like there's times where I hear people list off a bunch of Mandela effect
Okay.
scenarios, and I'm like,
All
yeah,
right.
that's the Berenstain Bears was it's spelled the other way, and they're like, no, it's been this way for the last 40 years, and um,
I
you know,
know.
you probably know more than I do, but
Well, no,
I,
but I've heard of people that, in other words, they're not looking for Mandela effect. They almost trip over it because they have a certain memory of whatever. Let's say a product, anything like what you
yeah,
just described, and they're like, I remember this in childhood, or what precisely. I know this thing is this way, and then it's changed.
yeah,
And
and
you're
it's
like,
almost like the
man,
same thing with the trying to link past lives to
hmm,
actual tangible evidence, and it's like slightly
that makes
off.
you think, who's tweaking it? Are we looking at a butterfly effect? Because that thing is like, it's one little change will kind of like move things around just a little bit, where,
Right.
or is it coincidental? Is that happenstance, or is somebody going back there and tweaking history or tweaking, which sometimes it doesn't make sense because sometimes the things are minimal,
Yeah.
the differences are minimal, but it's a very interesting idea as far as physics are concerned. And God, and because here we're talking about, what is it, parallel universes, time travel, God, that's a whole
Uh,
different thing. um because
yeah.
some people with that parallel universe, it's almost like basically they're, when people see ghosts, it's not really a ghost. It's basically you're seeing an intrusion from another dimension or another universe that's coexisting with ours at the same time.
They say all time is happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So is
Hmm.
this an interference of some other, you know,
Right.
is this ghost, is this an actual entity living in the 1800s that
Right.
our fabric of time is overlapping with their fabric of time?
Exactly. Right. They're not
Yeah.
ghosts. They're not dead people coming out. They're,
Yeah.
as far as they're living their existence in that moment, whenever it was. Yeah, that's a real mind bender, isn't it?
It is.
Let me ask you now, after you did that, did you have any paranormal experiences during or after you finished that? that
Yeah.
documentary?
Um, yes. It actually, when we were in the middle, the first film came out in 2009. The last film of the trilogy came out in 2016.
Okay.
So within that time, I think we were in the making of the second one. I was living in this house. I'm in Kingston, New York, a pretty historic area, about 2 hours north of New York City. And the house I was in, I had an office upstairs where I was working on the film, and I experienced. I guess the best way you put it, it was a haunted house, in simple terms.
Okay.
There were things happening in this house um, that we cannot explain. Like my wife heard stuff. My daughter, especially, she was probably about 5 or 6 at the time.
Okay.
We've never raised her thinking that ghosts was a real thing. We
Right,
always,
right. Like priming her for it.
yeah, we kind of kept her neutral. Like we didn't really force her on religion, or spirits or anything, even
Right.
aliens at this point. And in this house in particular, we lived in 2 other houses before this, and she would always ask us, in this one house, she started asking us, "Oh, are there ghosts here?" And
Yeah.
like, no, not that I've seen.
Right. Like, let me
Trying
be
not to
truthful
lie, but
here.
yeah, we've heard things. Uh, yeah, no, the house, something strange with that house. April and I were working on the film, and we were on the second floor, and I had basement steps going, these like wood deck steps that went down into like an open basement, and they were kind of loose. So when you walk down them, it's like the whole area of the house kind of shook. And
Mhm.
so we're working on the film, and we're trying to get this sound bite just right, and all of a sudden we hear somebody like roll down the steps and a woman scream.
Oh,
And I'm thinking, "Oh, no, did my wife just my
right.
wife and daughter weren't home at the time. My dog was home, and me and April were home, and I'm thinking, "Did my wife just come home and fall down the steps, or my daughter?" So I run down there, and no, there's
Right.
nobody else is here. So, um, I I'm yelling up to April, and I was like, "That was this house, right?" And she's like, "Oh, yeah, that was somewhere downstairs."
Oh,
So start walking down the basement at this point, and she goes, "That's it. That's the noise." And it was the basement steps.
okay.
And so later, I don't know, maybe it was like a week, maybe 2 weeks later, my grandmother happened to know the person that used to live in that house,
Oh.
and the woman who lived there was fairly elderly at the time. I want to say it was probably at the 1980s when she lived there, and
Mhm.
she fell down the steps and laid at the bottom of the steps for probably, I want to say it was like 4, maybe 5 hours before somebody found her.
Okay.
She lived through that, but I guess it was very traumatic, and
Sure.
I don't know if she was right after that. And I think she died shortly after that. But
Yeah, you could
you
for
kind
all
of,
for all things that fall caused her death.
yeah. And um, there,
Interesting.
there's other things
Wow.
that happen, like, um, we're the living room in that house. My wife and I, it was probably like 9 o'clock at night. My daughter went to bed upstairs, and we were in the TV room, which is like this long, probably about 20-foot hallway through the dining room, wood floor. So you could hear somebody walking on that as they approach the TV room. So my wife and I were watching TV, and we hear footsteps. I'm like, "Oh, this is my daughter coming." And so I pause the TV, and we wait for my daughter to show up, and she never comes around the corner into the room. I was like, "Oh, she probably," then I'm thinking she had to pass the kitchen. She's probably getting cookies or something she's not supposed to be eating. So I run, and nobody's downstairs. And I go up and I run upstairs, and my daughter's sound asleep in her bed. So this happens like every night now.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, "Oh, you know what it is? I started turning on the heat probably about a month ago. and as the baseboard heats up the floors readjust and they start cracking like somebody's walking on it. So this happens for the main, good part of the winter.
Okay.
Springtime, I turn off the heat, it still happens.
Oh, so much for that theory.
And it's like you could hear like footsteps, like, and then I started to analyze it, and it's like it's not like a kid, because my daughter, when they're like 5, 6 years old, they A to B, it's a constant run or a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Where these footsteps, it's like a lumbering step,
Right. I
going.
was about to ask you, what did it sound the footfall? Was it something
Yeah, it's
heavier? Yeah.
it's somebody, probably over 60, at my
Mm-hmm.
guess, that, they're not a young person. Um,
Right.
so it was interesting, yeah.
See, that I think those stories are so great because this is not you doing a ghost hunt. This is just you living, you
Yeah,
know,
and we
and you
moved
have these
out.
experiences.
We were only there a year, and this is the weird part too. We moved in August. Um, it was actually kind of a sad story with the previous owner. It was this elderly man who, his daughter lived in Florida, and there was another relative in the area. That's not a big deal, but daughter lived in Florida, came up, and he was so feeble at this point, he could barely take care of himself. So she took him to Florida to visit, and while she took him, she went to a realtor and put the house on the market, or to
Okay.
rent it out. They wanted to rent it out because he didn't want to sell it. So I guess he found out that he wasn't going back to this house, um,
Oh,
probably shortly after we moved in. And from what I've heard is that about 2 months later, he passed away when we were living
okay.
in the house. And that's around the time that
That you started hearing the
we
footsteps.
we started hearing things. And there would be times
Wow.
upstairs where I would be working, and I would hear. At the time, I thought it was my dog walking around. The dog was probably about 10 years old
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and he, we could see the life being sucked out of my dog.
Really?
And it's like he would be limping everywhere. Wouldn't want to go upstairs. Luckily, the main living area was on the first floor, and so I hear my dog walking around. I was like, "Oh, that's weird. What's he? He's got to go outside already for."
Right.
So I go downstairs. No, my dog's at the other end of the house, sleeping in the TV room, and I was like, "Well, who just walked into the living room?" And
Exactly.
so, so all these things started happening. That same time, the winter, we turned the heat on. I think it's the floorboards shifting. It turns out it's somebody else walking around that we couldn't see. And then we moved out, I want to say in July that year. And then somebody actually bought the house from
Right,
they,
right. Because now he had passed away, so they put it up
yeah.
for sale. Oh
So
boy.
somebody bought the house, and we have a friend that knew the people who moved in. I've never met them. And they eventually talked to the family that moved
Mhm.
in and said, "Oh, what do you think of the house?" Like trying to be,
Yeah.
slick about it without giving it away. And the family's like, "Yeah, we think it's haunted. We keep
You don't
we
say.
keep we keep hearing somebody walking around the downstairs, and weird things happen upstairs." And it's
Yeah,
like, our
stuff like that. It's like,
yeah,
and from what you're telling me, everything was auditory. You never saw anything. It was just the
yeah,
the noises that you hear.
we
That's so interesting. That's
yeah,
great. That is an excellent story because, like I said, this is what happens to people when they're living life, and it's like, what? And yet, of course, what you said, you think of all the plausible reasons. The dog, and the other story, my daughter and my wife just rolled down the stairs in the basement. Oh my god, that's
yeah.
stuff like that. That's
And
incredible.
it's those things that you can talk about it all day, but unless you experience it, you
Hmm.
can't
Yes,
say if it's true or not. That's the
exactly.
problem.
Exactly. That's exactly. It's like not everybody walks around with well, with a phone nowadays, but all these contraptions and stuff that they have on the paranormal shows is most people when you're living life and stuff happens to you. And by the way, like you said, okay, I don't have proof, but I know what I experienced. And that's all I need to convince
Yeah,
me as far as whatever, whether
it,
you want to say, well, it was an imprint was this. But that thing that you said, that the timing on it with the footsteps is after this gentleman passed away, that's very
Yeah.
interesting, because that's more than just you could say, well, this is an imprint on the fabric of that place, something that was very repetitive, and basically it's just like a loop. No, no, that's, and those and the new owners, we think it's haunted. Oh, could
And
be.
the other thing too, and I don't know how much I trust this evidence, but I did get a on the I don't know the smartphone app. It's called an
Hmm.
Ovilus. I don't know if you're
Yes,
familiar with. Okay,
yes.
so I was like I heard about it somewhere. I was like, this should be fun. So I
Hmm.
put it on. Of course, it says a different word. Like I don't know, however often, every 30 seconds it says something else. And I put it on. I think I had it on for 5 minutes. It said a couple words, but then it said the name. Um, I it said the name of the person who used to live in the house twice in a row.
Okay.
I don't want to say the name because
No, I
of
know
like
what you mean,
yeah
but I know exactly that you're thinking, okay, some people would say, well, those apps, they've just given them a bunch of words and
yeah
names and everything that just stuck, and they'll randomly just spit stuff out. But it makes you wonder, if I had to lay out the odds of that name twice being said. Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Then you go
It,
into, manipulation of electronics by the deceased. That's a whole different thing. That's so interesting. Wow.
yeah.
So
Well,
after that, no more encounters with the undead.
then I actually started having, and this is towards the end of the production of the second film, which was mainly about astral projection, out of body experiences. I began having out of body experiences at night, um, and then
Really
yeah, this happened on and off
interesting.
ever since. And for a while there, up until I want to say probably right before the pandemic, it was happening like a couple times a week, where you feel the vibration,
So this is without
and
you
then
trying to
also
do it, is what you're saying.
yeah. Um,
Wow.
So that happens actually quite a bit. The problem is I don't have these elaborate stories that like William Buhlman and
Hmm.
so many other astral
Right, right, right.
experts have. But it's
Do you know what was there a triggering event or something that you can say, after this happened is when I started experiencing these out of body things?
I yeah, there's in the second film, The Path Beyond the Physical, there's a whole sequence, probably about 2/3 of the way in, we demonstrate how hemisync works, and this is the main tool of the Monroe Institute, where one frequency goes in one ear, and then a slightly different frequency of sound goes in the
Okay.
other ear, and it entrains the brain that different frequency. I want to say it's like 104 hertz and then 100 hertz. So your brain is entrained to this 4 hertz in the middle, and it kind of
Okay.
syncs up your brain. Hence the term hemisync. So
Hmm.
we basically for this film, I made my own version of hemisync, and that's true hemisync in the film. I think we were actually using 100 and 104 hertz. So of course
Okay.
I'm hearing, and if you listen to it in stereo, the one your speaker is going to be slightly off. So I'm listening to this in headphones, probably I don't know several hours over the course of a couple days, just doing these
Okay.
tones, and that I think triggered it for me to have it.
Oh.
Um,
Hmm. That is so
and then
interesting.
the last time, and most of the time, like early on, it was kind of more elaborate. These scenes that would happen. It's like I would wake up and there would be like a figure walking in the bedroom just around the bed. Um, I would hear things like my mind would be awake, but my body's asleep. And I would have like,
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever sensed this, but when you're on the verge of astral projection, it's like you have this super hearing. And I thought like the one morning, I think it was an early morning, my wife and daughter are in the other room and I'm sound asleep, sleeping in, and I hear footsteps, like you can hear the carpet crunch. And
Okay.
I feel it sounds like somebody's approaching the bed. And I'm in this state probably for a good maybe minute, maybe 2 minutes. And so I'm thinking my daughter's about to wake me up, and I turn around, there's nobody there. Um,
All right.
and just stuff like that. A lot of um, I think I woke up at one point and I'm like floating in the middle of the living room. It's like most
Okay.
of my stuff, I never leave the house. It's like I'm in this out of body state within the house.
Okay.
I've
Okay.
flown through walls, that within the house.
It's
I
almost
can't,
like you're doing it, testing, and see what this feels like.
and yeah, and the
That is
last
so
time,
interesting.
the
Because
last
that thing
time,
about you hearing somebody approaching you on the bed,
yeah,
and you're thinking you're not wigging out because you're thinking it's your kid that's about to wake you up.
and I haven't had it in a while. I want to say pre-pandemic, probably right before the pandemic hit, or as it was approaching.
Mm-hmm.
I had the sensation of having the out of body experience, but this time it's like a hand. I could feel like a hand on my head. It's like holding me in my body, and it wouldn't let me leave my body at that point. And I think I've maybe had one slightly out of body experience after that,
Mm-hmm.
but up until then it was like maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And
Wow.
it's like something kept me. It's like, no, you have to stay here to experience something for whatever
Right.
reason. So I don't know. And it happened
It's
so many
like,
times that I was losing sleep over it. It's like your sleep, and
uh-huh.
a lot of times I just push it away. It's like, no, I'm too tired. I gotta catch up on
Right.
sleep. And
Right. Exactly. That is
but
God. That's interesting. Let me ask
yeah,
you, something I'm
yeah,
curious about. Why did you name your company 11? What you named it?
yeah. So we um we were on a path. Um, I was thinking, what are we gonna call it? It's like I think April in one of her meetings was like, "Well, you're kind of like on a path, to the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual awakening. It's this path to understanding life about after death, the path of life, all
Right.
this stuff." And then like, okay, what's the path? And then we named the movie first, and we were like, well, we should name the company after the movie. Um,
Okay.
and at that point, it was just the path. This is before we named out like the different trilogy. And so after we came up with the path, then we're like, okay, well, it can't be the path. And then I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. There's so many failed names in between that. Um, like, we're thinking different things, and we had numerology done, um,
Okay.
and it's I guess my master number is 11, and my minor number is a 2,
Okay.
and April's is a 9. So
Yeah. 9 and 2
I'm
is
11 by
11.
myself. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
so yeah,
Right. Exactly.
and then
Do
we
you know
lived
the reason why
11.
I ask you is that I'm partial to the number telling? I was born on the 11th. My husband was born on the 11th. The 11th is
Okay.
so yeah, everything. So that's why I wonder if he's an 11th person,
Yeah.
because that's an unusual name for a company. So yeah,
It
and I understand the numerology aspect of it. Yeah.
turns out April was born at 1:11 p.m. and
Uh-huh.
we lived 11 miles apart at the time.
Oh
So
wow.
it's just a little stuff here and there,
Yeah.
that added up to 11. She
Yeah,
she
a lot
she
of
knows. I'm sure she could come up with like a bunch more things that happened that linked us to 11. Like,
interesting.
well, what about Path
Very.
11?
I needed it to be a story behind that. I was like, that name. There's a reason for that 11 in there. Anyway, Michael, thank you so much for spending this time. It has been absolutely wonderful for my podcast listeners, because I am going to have a link to your website on the credits. What is your website address?
You can find the podcast, which April hosts. She does a great job hosting. It's
Mm-hmm.
path11podcast.com. You
Okay.
can find our TV site at path11tv.com. Um, People can sign up for a 7-day free trial. We have uh, everything after the films is on that site. We have an
Okay.
interview show. We're invited to film the Afterlife conference for the last, I want to say, 4 years now.
Okay.
Um, so we have a lot of presentations, talks on path11tv.com. And slowly but surely, we'll be moving our films over to there, and future film projects will be moved over to Path 11 TV.
Do you have any projects in mind now or that you're working on?
Yep. We are going into pre-production now for a future film. There's no date or
Okay.
schedule yet. We're just kind of loosely outlining it. It's about after death communication,
Okay.
um, which can be right now. We have a wide range of things. It's EVPs, mediums, channeling,
Mm-hmm.
even hauntings might even be in there if we can find it appropriate.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. The delivery. It's just how it ends up, the message comes through.
yeah.
Again, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to speak to you.
Uh, Thank you.
And I wish you the best of luck
Thank you.
on all your new projects.
Thank you. Yeah,
Take
this was fun.
And let me know maybe next time if when because I'm working on my new season of my show. Maybe we could do something where we could bring April in if she's interested. So because you're telling me she works a lot like in the alternative healing or what is it
Yeah.
hypnotherapy, Reiki, things like that.
Yeah, and she would have been here today, but she's got a day full of clients. She does
I
mental health
understand.
counseling, and she also does Reiki healing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I,
and
I understand.
she could talk for hours about her experiences,
See.
and she's good at it too.
Okay, I'll make sure that we can get her. We'll coordinate for the dates to make sure that we
Sure.
can have her on. Again, thank you
Yeah.
so much and good luck.
Thank you. This is
Take
great.
care. Bye bye. Wow, this was so interesting. I love it. Well, you know what? It's refreshing to speak to somebody like I always do. You have the people that are tried and true enthusiasts in the paranormal. Yes, it is. It's real. It exists. And then you get the person that, like him, he wanted to, you know, grew up in, I guess, for lack of a better word, a normal household with normal, what can I say, expectations of what the afterlife is. Heaven, hell, you're good, if you're bad, is going to catch up to you after you die. And that's it. And, um, and I know that a lot of people don't like to think about it because it's almost like, let's face it, if you're alive and you're happy to be alive, you don't want to think about death. And I think we do that on purpose. That's the way we're supposed to be. But sometimes when you have experiences like what he described, where you maybe have um, the death of loved ones, whether they're family or friends, in a short period of time, sometimes those questions, in other words, it's almost like what I learned as I was growing up about what happens to you after you die. Is that right? Is it accurate? Or is there more to it? Sometimes it has to do with, let's say, if you're worried about the person that passed on, or if it was something unexpected that you're thinking, I wish there was a way I knew to make sure that this person is okay. In other words, I could make my peace with them having passed on if I knew they were okay. And by this, how can I say it? By this, I'm not talking like what he described. When you have maybe an elderly person that's passed away, or sometimes even a younger person, but they have some type of illness, which, in other words, that they're going to be dying, and they've even made their peace with they're going to be dying. I'm talking about other types of situations where it's unexpected, uh, or even sometimes people become sick and they die very quickly. I'm not talking about somebody where they're like ill and like they become sick and they just they go downhill real quick. In other words, that you think, okay, there's no time for acceptance, or that a lot of people then ask themselves, man, when what I was brought up to believe, is that really the way it is? I wish I knew that really what happens to us after do we go to heaven? Is that person okay? The pearly gates, that traditional Judeo-Christian, or not, you're going to hell or whatever, or like, a lot of people say, well, you know what? I'm going to be able to see this person again. It might be many years, but I will be able to see this person again when I die. So I think that those are the questions that sometimes people that spur people on. In some cases, like what he described, where he took his experience in filmmaking and they start to produce almost like, okay, let's try to gather answers to those questions, and there could be more than one answer because, like we said, that's the answers to that could be so fluid, so different. And as far as producing proof, you could in certain instances maybe, but like everything else, um you're thinking, well, what if, you know how can I say, it's so subjective. Everybody's different. It depends on your belief systems. It depends what um what's the source, what's the motivation for saying what I um you have people that you could say, you know what, when I heard this person say this story about, let's say, an encounter or something they saw, that you say this person is a reliable witness. This person would not make this up. I really believe it. Coming from that person, I really believe it. I might not have witnessed it, but I believe it because that person would never say they had that experience if that wasn't the truth. As a matter of fact, they're the kinds that are resistant. Just like when he was describing that he's here renting this house and all these things start to happen, and he's not there doing a ghost hunt. He's not trying to capture EVPs. He's not running around. He's just, and then these things happen. And like I said, once upon a time, that's what people used to do when they used to have weird experiences. They would try to find a plausible, logical explanation for why that's happening. Instead of like, oh, it's the ghost. No, it's not the ghost. He's thinking dog heater. My wife somehow had an accident down the stairs. In the case of the footsteps, it's my daughter. Which, by the way, I hear a lot when people at the beginning that they start having these experiences, auditory especially, or sometimes when they catch people out of the corner of their eye, like the peripheral vision, they assume it's another family member, anything but. So they don't really wig out. It's when it starts happening over and over and over again. And like he said, you get up and you look for that person. There's nobody there. Hey, I stopped using the heater and I'm still hearing the footsteps or whatever. Okay, what are you left with? And then you ask yourself, so what do you do about something like that? Is it a real haunting? Is it an intelligent haunting? Is it something just residual, something that happened a lot? Does it get any worse than just shuffling on the carpet? Oh, I guess if it's a rental, you don't have to worry about it. But obviously something was going on because when those new owners took over, they had already experienced something. Well, anyway, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. I have a lot of great shows lined up. Please come back every week. I have a lot of great guests. I'm considering starting to go live with some of the guests. Like I said before, I had never done it because it was really difficult sometimes to bring in the guest I wanted to and make our schedules work. But let's see what we could angle where I might do a transition where we do the live show, and let's see how that works out. And that way, my interest in it, of course, is to help bring in my audience if you want to ask questions or anything while the show's going on so that we could answer. Again, don't forget, go to miamighostchronicles.com if you want links to all the podcasts, whether it's sourced from me without commercial interruptions, or you can go to any of the regular podcast platforms. You're going to find it there, marlenepardo.com. Again, sign up for my newsletter. Like I said, I keep you once a week, short article, links to related videos, and I announce everything there, whether it's writing projects, if I have giveaways, you name it. Go to marlenepardo.com or miamighostchronicles.com. Again, thank you so much. You are all wonderful.